Hello, welcome. Here we are in the CSS Transforms challenge. So this one we're going to talk about this transform property, it's quite an interesting one, and it's actually extremely useful, although it might not be immediately apparent. And it's not only useful, but you can do some fun stuff with it and you can make your elements look very different than they normally would. So this is not very visible. Let's just start by walking through here. Use absolute positioning to move the three label divs to their correct positions. And so the correct positions are based on this image. I took an image because it's easier to just see where these things are supposed to go than to describe it. We want this top, and you see over there in the preview right now, it's just sitting there in the main div. This top div to be positioned sort of like a label would be, right on top of the border, not just pushed up against the top of the div, but right on top of the border. And center to be visually centered in here, both horizontally and vertically. And we want bottom to be just like the top except for the bottom border. We want it to be centered on the bottom border. So we're going to check out how to do that. And in order to do that, we're going to use transforms. So we'll just ignore the tests for now. And let us make this larger. All right, so there's some basic styling set up for you. Set up the labels here so that they have some border and they look generally like the image. And then you can style them each individually here. You, of course, can style this however you want to pass those tests. But this is how I set it up, just to hopefully make it a bit more clear. So let's just go ahead and we'll use this bottom one to do some examples. And to make it stand out visually, I'm going to say background crimson and color white. Okay. And anything else? We could make it, wouldn't quite be a lesson without, not background, border, color, lime. There we go. That's real obvious. All right, so we're going to be using this div to play around. So first thing we can do is let's use some absolute positioning. And you'll see in the challenge instructions that you're going to need to be using absolute positioning, and you can do it up here. Position absolute, because we're going to need it on all of them. However, as you saw, that made everything kind of go into the same place. I'm going to just do it down here so we can focus on this one. And it might make it a little more clear what's happening when everything gets absolutely positioned. And absolute. All right. So the first thing, this is sort of a revisiting of absolute positioning. The first thing to notice is that this button just scrunches down. It gets a lot slimmer. And the reason that happens is when you use absolute positioning, it's a lot like using display table, which, if you remember, display table will make everything take up as much space as it needs to, but not more space, whereas display block will tell items to be as wide as they possibly can. So display table, you'll see that looks similar to what we got when we said position absolute, and it is very similar. Oops, open the menu there by accident. But position absolute lets us do a lot more stuff, such as saying top 0. And we just moved it up to the top. If you didn't have position absolute, but did have display table, that would not work. So let's bring that back. So now we're at the top here. This is the bottom one. So let's say go to 100% of the top, or rather move away from the top by 100%. That brings it down here to the bottom. And then we're going to want to, we want to move it to the center, right? So we can say left, also go 50%. In there, this isn't going to look good, and it shouldn't, because this is not right. But what's going on here? We said go 100% down from the top, which does look right. So we're down from the top of this. Here's our thing. When we're talking relatively, we're talking about this element right there. And the reason is, let's go up here real quick and just confirm, yes, this has position relative on it. So it is everything we style absolutely inside of it, and these are all inside of the box, they are going to be relative to it. So we said top 100%, as in move from the top. So it was over here. Let's say if we had top 0 anyways and left 0, that would be this point over here. And we said from the top go down, or from the top move away 100%. And so that's what it did. That's why the top edge here is 100% down from the top of here. Just to, I think vertically speaking, there's that distance. And same with the left, although this one might look a bit more strange, but left said from the left move over by 100%. And so that was, just take some of that away. It's getting busy. So here's left 0 and move away by not 100%, sorry, 50%. And so it did that. And what it did is it moved 50% of this parent container. Although my drawings aren't extremely precise, this is 50%. You'll see that there's roughly the same amount of space on either side of that. So this is why we're talking about transforms, because if we want to move the button, or it's a label here, this bottom element, and we want it to show up on top of this border down here, sort of like right there. And we're going to want the same for the top to show up right there and the center to show up right there. This is where we can use transforms to our advantage, because what we could do, of course, is instead of 100, let's say like 90. And it's not quite there. 93, that looks good. And over here, we could say, what, 40? No, not there. 30, that looks better. 33, we'll just say there. Let's use 33. And this will work, it's just fragile. This will work if the parent element isn't changing its dimensions at all. And so it's not here. So this could work. If we had this box that's just going to be the exact same dimensions, you can totally use this approach by just eyeballing it and figuring it out, or finding pixel values you can measure and figure out exactly where you want to place it. But it's sort of fragile. It's not always going to work for us. What we really want is to say, essentially in English we would say, always be positioned in the vertical center of the vertically centered on that lower border, and horizontally centered on that lower border. So let's bring this back. We'll say 100 and 50. So what these values do is these actually are going to work for whatever container they're in. It will move down 100% and left 50%. But what we want is visual center, right? So let's just bring in this transform property. What are we going to put in there? There's a lot we can put in here actually, but we're going to focus right now on translate. So we have this value translate, which is, it takes some more values inside of it, some unit values. We're going to say, let's just start with one axis. We'll say translate x, and we're going to tell it to, on the x-axis, move itself, aka translate itself, by -50%. Now you can see this is nicely horizontally centered now. And the reason is that this 50% is relative to itself. This is 50% of its own width, and width because we're talking about the x-axis here. Let's bring the other one. Translate instead of x. Can you guess? Y. And the same amount. And look at that. We have a nicely centered element here. In fact, one of the tests is probably passing right now, but I'm not going to open that back up. This is exactly what we wanted. And I'm just going to throw in some shorthand here as well. Instead of using translate x, translate y, we can just use them right in the we can say translate, let's still translate X. Instead of translate X or translate Y, we can just say translate, and we can give it an X and give it a Y. And so this value right here, just this taken all as one piece, is actually fairly common for this exact reason. You can move something to a point, and then you can center it back on itself, say. So this is another one of those areas where CSS is not immediately intuitive, or it's not clear just by looking at this if you didn't already know what this is doing. Here we have 50%, and here we have 50%. We have the negative sign in front of it, but ignoring that for a second, we just have 50%, and it's not at all clear 50% of what. So this is one of those areas that can be very confusing, and if you can remember these, or once you remember them, because just simply getting enough repetitions, doing this enough, will help you remember a lot, then you'll begin to see exactly how you can style things just by taking advantage of various percentage widths, such as the width of a parent or the width of the element itself, and the same goes for height. So that's the key. Before I end this video, and you can go on and you can fill these out, you should be able to get them where you want now that you've seen transform translate. Let's look at some other transforms we can do. So transform is quite flexible. There are a bunch of things you can do with this. We can say scale, scale, can't type right now, 2, whoa, that's much bigger, 3, 4, 5, sail. We can also go in the other direction. And we could say, so scale 1 is the default. And you'll notice that this is invalid. That's why if I say scale nothing, scale ... this is all invalid. And by being invalid, it invalidates this entire transform. So we're no longer getting translate here. We're just getting nothing because this is invalid. But we can say, so like I said, we have 2 and we have 1. And we can also say, so we can use decimal numbers in here. So 1.0 is still just 1, but let's say, first of all, 0.0, which is none, so it's going to disappear. But 1, or do you see it? This is 1/10 of its size. Yeah, this is not a call to action in any way. But look, there it is. It's tiny, it's there. And if we come back over here, well, I'm just going to stay zoomed in for a second. We'll bring it up to 3. This should be considerably more visible. Yeah, we'll zoom back out. We can say 0.4, 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.7.8, etc., etc., 0.9. And let's just say 1. So scale 1. And one more cool thing we can do. So there's actually more to this. There's more to the transform property that I'm not going to go into, because part of this course, what we really want to accomplish is to choose out things that are very important. Scale is, to be honest, not that important, but I think it's a fun one to use, and you can do interesting things like what I'm going to do here. Let's say button hover. So you might find it quite useful when you're building, if you have your layout the way you want it, and you want to get some interesting hover effects, or you just want to do some more interesting things visually. Scale can be a nice one, and translate too. So we can say on hover, why don't you give yourself a transform of scale 2, and just when you hover over this label, I'm thinking of it as a button in my mind. I think it's because the word bottom and button get very confused in my head, at least while I'm making these videos. So we are going to, let's see, yeah, see, as you can see, bottom. Okay, when you hover over this, let's just make sure this is working. Background. Let's go with Azure. No, wheat. Stick with the food. There you go. Yeah, that is working exactly as expected. Well, exactly as I expected. But I intentionally sort of broke this. On the hover state, the button, the bottom, I should really just make this into a button, since I keep on calling it a button. This bottom div, just put div there to remind myself. This bottom div is moving, right? It's or rather, it seems like its upper left-hand corner over here is staying put, while the rest of it sort of loses its translation. It's not getting moved back by 50% and up by 50% anymore. And the reason is because we totally overwrote this here. We overwrote it with scale 2. What we need is we still need this in here, even with scale 2. And there we go. That's much nicer. And this is a bit abrupt, right? So this is a total extra I'm just going to throw in here because this, we're going to talk about transitions real quick, because you can say transition all for 0.2 seconds, and let's just try that. Let's see. Whoa, look at that. So when we hover this, you'll see that we get this interesting transition, and it's a bit quick. Let's make it extremely slow. Hover this. Whoa, look at that background color changing, the scale changing. Whoop. So that is nice, but you also notice that when we move our mouse out, it just snaps back. That's no fun. Thing is, we would want to take this, transition and actually put it on the div.bottom always, not only when it's hovered. We want to put it on always. So let's hover it and unhover it. Hey, that is much nicer. So we haven't seen a lot of actual animations or things moving around so far in the course, but using this transition property, and by then changing things. So if we take this away, nothing's going to happen. There's nothing to transition. What transition gives us is it lets us take things that are set to some value and transition them, animate them to another value. The browser just handles that for you. So if we just do the background, this is way too slow. That's a little something like a middle ground, 0.4 seconds. There we go. And we'll bring back in our scale. That's looking excellent. And rather than scale, we could just totally, let's leave that at 1. And let's say actually let's make it move. It's hovered. This is gonna look just terrible, I think, but let's go with it. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's nothing like a button that tries to run away when you hover it. Right, it's not a button. This is a div.bottom, but you get the idea. This is this latter section, and showing transitions is just to give you a better taste of what transform can do. And there are other properties. You can rotate things, you can scale things as you saw here, you can move things. Maybe that's a good place to end this, is to say there is with, as in a comment, with transform property, you can move things, which is translate. You can change the size of things, which is scale, and you can rotate things. Rotate. And so yeah, that rotates things. We don't even need an explanation there. And you can do some other stuff too. I'm just going to call it other stuff because maybe we'll explore it in some other lesson, but for now, you can look up the documentation for transform and see what other stuff you can do. You can do things like there's skew, there's something called perspective, there's some other stuff that you really have to see to understand what it does, and it definitely falls under the category of you are not going to need it almost any of the time. When you really get into, like, if you want to make your elements do some interesting 3D stuff, you might get into that, or you really want to make some more interesting animations than just having a button that tries to escape when you hover it. So I'll drop a link to that other stuff in the resources of this lesson, and you can check it out. But believe me when I say you are not going to need it most of the time. So just pursue it if you're interested, and if you're not, if it doesn't strike your interest immediately, move on to other stuff that is going to be more impactful as you learn programming. All right, see you next lesson.